Tonight, 14 Democratic candidates are trying to have their own breakout moments at that very same event on the same night that Beto O'Rourke drops out of the race. So there's a lot to talk about in the 2020 race. But first, House Democrats are preparing to take the impeachment investigation public. Speaker Nancy Pelosi told Bloomberg News that public hearings from key witnesses could start later this month. But she cautioned that there was no deadline to finish the investigation and that any case to impeach the president, quote, has to be ironclad. The investigating committees have already heard testimony from 13 witnesses who have provided roughly 100 hours of testimony behind closed doors. Next week, House Democrats have 11 more witnesses on their deposition calendar, and their testimonies could prove pivotal. On Monday, the investigating committees are scheduled to hear from National Security Council lawyer John Eisenberg, who allegedly moved a transcript of the phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine to a secret server. And breaking tonight, investigators have subpoenaed John Eisenberg to appear before the impeachment committees next week, rather than rely on his voluntary cooperation. That's according to the New York Times. New reporting suggests that John Eisenberg knew how damaging that phone call was to the president. This man, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who served as National Security Council's director for Ukraine, told lawmakers that he went to John Eisenberg to register his concerns about the call. According to a person in the room for Vindman's deposition, John Eisenberg recorded Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's complaints and then conferred with his deputy about how to handle the conversation. Politico reports, quote, the lawyers then decided to move the record of the call into the NSC's top secret code word system. Vindman did not consider the move itself as evidence of a cover-up, according to a person familiar with his testimony, but he said he became disturbed when a few days later, Eisenberg instructed him not to tell anybody about the call, especially because it was Vindman's job to coordinate the interagency process with regard to Ukraine policy. NBC News and the Washington Post have since confirmed that reporting. Also breaking tonight, House Democrats have scheduled outgoing Energy Secretary Rick Perry to provide testimony to the impeachment committees. A spokeswoman for Rick Perry told the Wall Street Journal that he won't testify behind closed doors. But the spokeswoman added, quote, if the committee is interested in conducting serious proceeding, they are welcome to send the secretary's consideration an invitation to participate in an open hearing where the department's counsel can be present and the American people can witness. So we might see Rick Perry on our television sets in an open hearing sooner than we think. Now, like with Rick Perry, it's important to note, we don't know if many of these witnesses will actually appear for their closed-door depositions. If precedent holds, most of them will, but nothing is guaranteed with this administration. Last night, Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff said that the committees will start releasing the transcripts of all these closed-door depositions from diplomats, military advisors, and foreign policy experts that have yielded blockbuster evidence of a quid pro quo.
One of the aspects of the resolution that we passed today authorizes me to begin releasing transcripts, and I would expect that process will begin as early as next week.
Now, as I mentioned, later this month, House Democrats plan to take the impeachment investigation public. But even before the public hearings take place, it seems like the investigation has already started putting a dent in President Trump's poll numbers among Republicans. A new Washington Post ABC News poll finds that 49% of Americans say that President Trump should be impeached and removed from office. 47% of Americans say that President Trump should not be impeached. Now, here's where things get interesting. 18% of Republicans polled say that the president should be impeached and removed from office. Almost 1 in 5 Republicans wants Trump out. And the president's approval rating among Republicans has dropped 13 points since this summer. In July, Trump enjoyed support from 87% of Republicans, and now that support is at 74%. Who knows how low it could go once the impeachment investigation is all out in the open. Leading off our discussion tonight, Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee and has attended many of the closed-door depositions for the impeachment investigation. Also joining us, Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. She's an MSNBC legal contributor. And Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, who is also an MSNBC political analyst. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining me here on a Friday evening. Congressman Khanna, good to see you again. Let's talk about what the next step is in this process, the open hearings. At least for the next week or so, we presume the hearings, the people who have been subpoenaed or invited will still testify in a closed-door setting where Democrats and Republicans are present.
Yes, Ali, we will continue to gather the evidence, and it's important to understand that Republicans are there as well. They have their counsel, but then we will quickly move to public hearings. And the important thing to realize here is that the facts really aren't in dispute. I think a few key witnesses, like Ambassador Taylor, will establish that the president withheld aid, pressuring Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, his political rival, and this is unconstitutional.
Congressman, what's the advantage of the closed-door hearings versus the public hearings? If you keep on getting the evidence that we keep on hearing because we see some of these opening statements that the witnesses present, they seem to corroborate the story that Democrats believe to be the case. Why the closed-door hearings versus open hearings?
Well, first of all, I think many of the witnesses may not be willing to come and be badgered in front of national television. I mean, the Republican attacks on career civil servants and people who have served our military have been outrageous. And I don't think we would get the same cooperation or the same honesty if we were forcing these individuals to have to testify to millions of people and face the wrath of the President of the United States and the Republicans.
But they ultimately will, right? What will happen? You'll take sort of the best of and put them together for public hearings?
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of the depositions eventually will be released, but not everyone is going to have to testify publicly, and they are going to have the opportunity first to make the case in private instead of in the glare of the television. So I think that this is the way almost all investigations have taken place, and the Republicans are making a process argument for one simple reason. They know they can't defend the facts. I mean, the facts are so simple. The president pressured Zelensky to investigate his political rival and withheld military aid.
Barbara McQuade, we now know through the course of testimony that there were lawyers involved. The Washington Post is reporting on John Eisenberg, he and his request to Alexander Vindman not to talk about the Trump-Ukraine phone call that Vindman was so concerned about that we've all heard about. And I want to quote from the Washington Post. The interaction between Eisenberg and Vindman suggests there was a sense among some in the White House that Trump's call with Zelensky was not, as the president has repeatedly claimed, perfect. Eisenberg has been subpoenaed. We don't know whether he will attend the deposition or not. But the fact is, this is a lawyer for the National Security Council. What does this make you think?
I think it's very concerning. We had already heard the information that John Eisenberg, the lawyer, had taken the unusual step of concealing this call in a code word safe where it's not normally stored. That raised a lot of questions, I think, as to why that was done. And now we have this additional testimony by Colonel Vindman that he also told him not to tell anybody about this call. I think that suggests what prosecutors refer to as consciousness of guilt. This could be a basis for obstruction of justice, although to prove a case of obstruction of justice, you have to show that there is an investigation pending, and this may have predated any investigation. But it shows something deeper, which is this idea of consciousness of guilt. You don't have to hide things if you think that they are honest and done forthrightly. You hide things when you worry that there's a problem there. And so the mere fact that he is storing it in this special safe and that he is asking Vindman not to speak about it suggests that he knows that there's something problematic about it.
Ben, talk to me about this, because you were at the National Security Council. I don't know if you ever experienced things like this, but how would this have been handled? How should this have been handled? If Vindman heard something that was of concern to him, it sounds like as a military man, he had a sense of process about him. He went to the NSC's lawyer. Probably the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, the NSC lawyer, though, used to be there to not facilitate crimes, right, but to make sure that we were acting in an ethical way. what is so extraordinary to me about this is I knew that system. That system was reserved for very sensitive matters, covert operations of the United States, things that dealt with very sensitive human intelligence sources, for instance. You don't put things on that server just because they're embarrassing. And you certainly don't put things on a server because you realize, wait a second, the President of the United States may have just committed an impeachable offense, a crime, in his phone call with a foreign leader. And so it's rather extraordinary to me that the lawyers, the people who are supposed to be keeping people on the right side of the law in the White House, were instead trying to conceal information. And, Ali, there's just no other reason to put that call on that server. There's no sensitive information in that call. There's no intelligence referred to in that call. The only reason to put that call transcript on that server is if you don't want enough people to see it to catch you in the crime that the president committed.
Congressman Khanna, I know you can't tell me about things that were not in the public eye in the last couple of weeks in terms of testimony, but it does appear from what we have heard has happened that each witness tends to corroborate the last witness. We had Tim Morrison, who said he didn't think what the president did was illegal, but that's sort of beside the point. He did say that he heard the same things that others had said that they had heard about that call on that call. So whether you interpret it as illegal or not is a separate question. Are you hearing things that are surprising you? Are you hearing things that are contradicting the message we got from the president himself, the message we got from the memo itself of that phone call?
Ali, based on the public reporting, here's what's important to realize. This was not just one phone call by Donald Trump with Zelensky where he misspoke or spoke aggressively. This was a coordinated effort that lasted months by the White House to pressure Zelensky to get dirt on Joe Biden because the president of the White House feared that Joe Biden was the person most likely to beat him, and they were willing to withhold military aid. And what's remarkable is how many people were involved in this scheme. And it's important to realize the Republicans are saying, oh, quid pro quo is just part of normal foreign policy. This is not the president saying, get to the bottom of corruption. This is the president saying, help me beat my political rival who's winning in the polls.
So let's talk about this, because the president very quickly after news of this broke said it was about corruption in Ukraine. I want to ask Barbara a legal question about it. I want to ask Ben a question on the facts on this one. President Trump mentioned this at a rally in Tupelo, Mississippi tonight. Let's listen.
When you call the leaders of country, many people listen. And I'm on the phone, and they want me to say to this brand new president who just got there, call to congratulate him, please, could you help me, please? I don't know who he is. I didn't know his name until I looked down the card. And one of the reasons I held up money, very important, corruption. But the other reason, why isn't Germany and France and UK and all of these European nations that are right there, why aren't they doing things that they're supposed to do? Why is it always the United States?
So from the applause there, you can see that this works for the audience that's listening to him, except for the fact that it's not true, what the president just said. Yeah. The idea, and he's been saying this since he tried the corruption thing and didn't work, he then moved to the whole, I'm holding out so that the Europeans would do more for Ukraine. The Europeans have always done more for Ukraine since the beginning of this crisis with Russia.
Yeah, and we put together with the Europeans this entire strategy of essentially imposing pressure on the Russians, imposing sanctions on the Russians, and providing coordinated support, the United States and Europe, to the Ukrainian government. And to follow up on something that Rose said that's really important, the people who've testified, I used to work on this policy, Ali, it's everybody who works on the Ukraine policy. Right. It's the guy in the White House who works on it, the guy in the State Department, the Pentagon, the woman in the Pentagon. You know, everybody who would be sitting around the table in the interagency process was witting of essentially this corruption of our Ukraine policy to make it not about working with the Europeans to try to strengthen the Ukrainian government, but rather to make it about how can we facilitate Rudy Giuliani's effort on behalf of Donald Trump to pressure this government to investigate the president's political opponents. That is a wholesale corruption, again, not just in one phone call, but in what the entire U.S. government was doing, the taxpayer-funded U.S. government was doing to pressure Ukraine to do Trump's political bidding.
Barb McQuaid, Ben just reminded me, we haven't heard from Rudy Giuliani for a few days. 1 week ago, we were talking about how he had butt dialed an NBC reporter. That said, Donald Trump continues to try and have this tried in a court of public opinion. He, in the course of one speech, has now tried out the corruption angle and tried out I was just waiting for UK and Germany and France to do more. Does any of this matter in the end?
It could. Anything he says, anything he tweets are admissions that can be used against him later. If he locks himself into a certain story and then changes his story later, there is some suggestion that there is a lack of truth there. But I think that impeachment, unlike criminal prosecution, is ultimately a political process. And so if he can win in the court of public opinion, he may be able to win in the impeachment battle as well. So I think that's the game he's playing. He's good at it, and I'm sure he will continue to try to distract people, referring to the perfect call and trying to distract people from the real facts.
Barbara McQuaid, thank you. Congressman Ro Khanna and Ben Rhodes. Ben, stick around. I'm going to talk to you later. Thank you for getting us started, though, the three of you.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.